Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsam. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsam. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsam. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsam. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsam. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsam. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Baba, Biala Matsama, Yesu, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Oh, Achigachia Bia, Biala Matsama. Baba.
That's what we say in Ethiopia. From the song, right?
That means good morning, and the right response is good morning. And the right response in Amharic, though, I'll teach it to you real quick. I wasn't planning on doing this, but we'll try. I would say Andemanadarachu, and you say እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን, which means thanks be to God. Think you can do that? እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን. It's going to be tough. You ready? እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን. ይመስገን. Because we have a lot to be thankful for today. We'd say, ዝናብ አለ, እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን. There's rain, thanks be to God. ፀሐይ አለ, እግዚአብሔር ይመስገን. There is sun, thanks be to God. Because we have a lot to be thankful for. David, he's somewhere in here, I lost him, but he talked about thankfulness. And that is one of the things that we can be anytime, whether it's raining, whether it's sunny, and we have a lot to be thankful for in our life. Meshach. I want to talk about Meshach today. He's my hero. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know the guy. I always pick Meshach, though, as my hero of the three, not for any special reason. You know the story, though. It's in Daniel chapter 3. We'll be talking about it today from the fiery furnace. But I always pick Meshach as my favorite because I always think Shadrach always gets all the credit because his name comes first, just by happenstance. And Abednego, it's too hard to say, you know. So Meshach, that sounds like a tough name. And I always imagine, this is not scriptural, so I'm not preaching and saying this is scriptural, but I always imagine that Meshach is the guy who, behind the scenes, was always encouraging his fellow. Can I move this? Is that all right before I run into it? Allison always says that I preach like my dad, and my dad knocks stuff over, and I'm just afraid I'm going to... where was I? Meshach. I always think of Meshach as the guy who was really encouraging, his other two guys in his faith whenever they came up against King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, these guys were the real deal. Think about it. These guys were getting it done in a cross-cultural setting. They're a missionary's hero. These guys were the SEAL Team 6 of missions. They were the tough guys. You know the story. Big, bad King Nebuchadnezzar. He makes this image of gold, 90-foot image of gold. Not a small little one. This sucker was huge, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in Babylon. Then he plays some music, and he tells people, he makes this decree. Everyone who hears this music has to bow down to this image of gold. Now, if someone doesn't want to bow to the image of gold, they can always choose option number 2, which is not as pleasant, which involves being thrown into this blazing, fiery furnace. Well, needless to say, most people choose option number 1 to bow to this image of gold. But this is where our all-star missions team, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come into the story. You see, these boys aren't from the area. These guys are Jews who actually had been abducted and then taken to serve in the Babylonian government. They were far from home, but they weren't alone. First of all, they had each other. But second, they had their faith. Their faith, though, told them that there was only one true God, and he wasn't a 90-foot statue on the plain of Dura. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to bow to this idol. Now, of course, in all good stories, there's a bad guy. In this story, some of the bad guys squealed on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these boys had to show up and explain themselves before the king. Well, the king was angry with them, but he took a fairly lenient stance on them. He gave them their options. He tried to spell it out clearly for them. He said, option number 1, boys, when you hear the music, bow. Or option number 2, you get chucked into the fiery furnace. Listen, though, this is where I think the story gets really good. I really like this story. It's fun to read. Before the king could even start up his band, this is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to him. And I want to read it to you directly from the scriptures. In Daniel chapter 3. They said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. And then they deliver what I think is a real zinger. And it took a lot of courage to say these things. They were in front of the most powerful ruler of the time. And this is what they said to him. But even if God does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. That's the kind of missionary I want to be. When the tough days come in Ethiopia, when the witch doctor puts a curse on my family, when the Muslim village leaders threaten me or my evangelists, when the government guys call in the police, when the rains come and the muddy roads look impassable, I want to channel my inner Meshach. There are mixing religions there a little bit, but I want to channel my inner Meshach. I want to see my hero in action in my own life. And I want to say things like, you know something, boys? My God is big enough to get me out of this mess. But even if he doesn't, I'm not backing down. I like those words, those 3 words, but even if. Think about those 3 little words. But even if. See, they don't signal a lack of faith. They are a statement of conviction. They say, I believe God can handle these challenges, but even if he chooses not to, I'm willing to burn for my faith. Often God chooses to fix our problems, heal us, do whatever. But some days, if you're going to be a Christian, especially in this culture, you have to be willing to burn. The last couple of years have been pretty challenging for Allison and I in Ethiopia. For a lot of different reasons, we sent our boys off to boarding school. We've had some challenges with the government. And I've been thinking a lot about Meshach. It feels like I spent a lot more time burning and a lot less time winning. And some of you may feel that way. I don't know. Maybe some of you are having a couple of great years. I don't know. But some of you may be in a couple of challenging years. And so I'd like to spend today just looking a little bit at this story and see how we can be just a little bit more like Meshach in times of challenges. The first application to our lives that this story teaches us is that there are always going to be things in our life, there are always going to be challenges in our lives that come up against our faith in God. Let me say this in a little bit different way. There are always going to be things in our lives that challenge our faith in God. If you look at the very first verse of Daniel chapter 3, It says this: King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. This was a big golden image. Now, King Nebuchadnezzar didn't do this specifically to pick on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Maybe he knew who they were, maybe he didn't. I don't know. The story doesn't say. I'm sure the king had other things on his mind, oppressing some people, invading another country, something. I mean, I'm sure he had lots of things going on in his head, but it probably wasn't, how can I pick on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego today? But his actions did affect Meshach and his friends in a very personal way. Life is like that. Think about it. Sometimes bad things, they just happen. Sometimes our culture will put us into situations that will challenge our faith. It's hard to be people of faith when everything around us and everybody around us is telling us not to be people of faith. I want to tell you a story. There was an evangelist that worked in Ethiopia for many years. He was a CMF. CMF planted a church in Ethiopia, and he worked in one of the churches. It was before Allison and I even went to Ethiopia. And he faithfully served in his church for lots of years, and then his daughter got very sick and then eventually died. And at that point, he found out some disturbing news, and that was that a rival clan had put a curse on his family, and specifically his daughter. And he really, in his mind, he firmly believed that it was because of this curse that his daughter died. Well, in response to his daughter's death, the evangelist did something that we would probably consider strange. What he did was he went to the local witch doctor and had the witch doctor put the curse back onto the other family. So you can imagine this did not help his ministry any. As a matter of fact, he's no longer in the church, and his faith is essentially non-existent. Now, honestly, this man's response is so foreign to us as to almost be incomprehensible to us. Why would somebody respond that way? Think about it. If your child died, would you respond by going to the nearest witch doctor and putting a curse on someone else? Probably not. That's probably not how we would do it. But the key to understanding his response is to recognize that in difficult times, people tend to revert back to what they know, what they understand, what they recognize. To you and me, witch doctors and curses are exotic and foreign. But to him, they're familiar, they're real. His default setting, his culture, told him to respond to the challenges in front of him in a certain way. But our culture puts similar kinds of pressures on us, different ways of pressuring us, but similar kinds of pressures. When things don't work out when we expect them to or want them to, how do we respond here in America? Do we run to the nearest witch doctor? Probably not. I don't even know if there are any witch doctors. There probably are in Johnson City, but we don't usually do that kind of thing. No, most likely we run towards skepticism, right? Most likely we run towards materialism or doubt. The default religion in America isn't animism like it is in Ethiopia. It's skepticism and overconfidence in our own abilities to fix our own problems. There are always going to be these kind of challenges to your faith in God in this life. And how are you going to respond? You're going to be like Meshach? The second thing I want us to see in this story about Meshach and his buddies is that the need for courageous faith doesn't always happen at pre-planned, convenient times. I'm going to say that again. The need for courageous faith doesn't always happen at pre-planned or convenient times. Meshach knew what he believed and what he stood for long before his confrontation with the king. If you want to be faithful in times of trial, you're going to need to go into life prepared for a spiritual battle. You can't prepare for the spiritual battle after it's already started. That's too late. Meshach, though, he was ready when it came. My family and I drive down some pretty rough roads in Ethiopia, and we never are quite sure what's going to be in front of us on any given road, but we try to go as prepared as we can. You know, maybe one day a tree has fallen across the road. It could be that another day a river has flooded and it's just very difficult to cross. Maybe the rains have made a mud bog out of our road. Could be lots of different things. Some days it's an easy drive. Some days it's a real battle. But we always drive down a road with a winch, a high lift jack, and a shovel. And we do that because we want to be prepared for whatever comes at us. Life is like that road. You might spend a lot of years cruising down the road with no problems. Everything is great. Sun is shining. But then all of a sudden, cancer. All of a sudden, financial trouble. The death of a loved one. Loss of a job. Or 100 other things. I can't even name all the things that can go wrong. Tons of things can go wrong in this life. Do you have the faith? Do you have the tools to handle those challenges? Now, what are the tools of faith anyway? I'm not going to go through all of the tools of faith that we can gain from this story, but there's a couple things I want to look at. We don't know specifically about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we do know about Daniel, a lot more about Daniel. And this story is in the book of Daniel. And we know more about the life of Daniel than we know about these boys. And we know that Daniel spent quite a bit of time with God. He spent quite a bit of time developing his relationship with God, talking to God, praying to God. Think about it. In Daniel, Daniel in the lion's den story? You know the story. Why was Daniel thrown into the lion's den in the first place? It was because, you remember? What is it? Why was he thrown into the lion's den?
The king wanted him to eat some.
It had to do with praying. I'll give you a hint. Was he supposed to pray or not pray? Not pray. But he did pray, didn't he? Very good. He spent time talking to God. And that's what got him into trouble. That's also what got him out of trouble, by the way. So we see that one of the tools in the life of Daniel was that he spent a lot of time talking to God and relating to God. I think it's a fairly safe assumption to think that his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, probably had some of the same practices in their life. There's another tool, though, that Meshach had that I want to focus a little bit more on. And that's that he was surrounded by a small community of like-minded believers. He didn't do it alone. There's a great quote from the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books. I don't know why. Maybe it's so dark, and there's a little bit of that in me, but it's also got some really good gems in it. One of the passages says, "Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls, the other will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him who is alone, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart." And talk about a pretty tough cord of 3 strands. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they had to endure crazy amounts of pressure on them. They had an empire that they were up against, and they didn't bend and they didn't break. See, your faith team is your church. Anyone who has navigated through difficult times in life, through challenging times in life, successfully will probably tell you the importance of having the support of other people around you, other people with like-minded faith. I work on a team of missionaries in Ethiopia, the CMF team there in Ethiopia. Now, we don't work together, physically. We don't work in the same village. We actually work in very spread out. But we always know that in a time of trial, whenever something goes wrong, one of them will help the other one out. We'll help each other out because we're a team. I can remember getting into a car accident. My whole family got into a car accident. We flipped the cars a lot of years ago. And when we did that, people from our team came. They left whatever they were doing. They came in and they helped us in that situation. It was pretty traumatic for us. But without a team to come get you when you're in trouble, when you flip your car, when you get cancer, when something else goes wrong, you're doing it all alone. That's no good. Your church is your faith team, and you need to develop relationships. You need to maintain these relationships during the good times so that you have them in the bad times. Now, churches can be very messy places. I know that. I've helped plant 15 of them. I've been a part of lots of different churches. And frankly, you don't always like everybody in your church. That's just the reality. Let's be honest. Churches are messy, political, social places. You might say, Craig, you just don't know how hard it is to get along with the people in my church. Well, the truth is, some of y'all really are hard to get along with. I know some of you. But the truth also is that some days, I'm pretty hard to get along with. Everybody has those kind of days. Everybody has those kind of situations. But the bottom line is this. If you're not developing strong relationships with your church community, you're driving down the muddy road of life without a winch and without a shovel. It's fine if you don't get stuck. Fine if nothing goes wrong. But as soon as something goes wrong, you're going to need those people in your life. This is the last point I want to make about this story. That faith is the act of aligning our goals with God's goals. Faith is the act of aligning our goals with God's goals. See, God's definition of success doesn't always look like the world's definition of success. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what they say to the king in verses 17 and 18 there in Daniel chapter 3. This is the key verse, in my opinion, in these two verses, in my opinion, from the whole chapter. They say, if it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. And then listen to these three words. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. See, to me, that's courage. It's easy for us. It's easy for me to stand here, preach those words. But can you just imagine being those three guys standing in, I don't know where they were standing, some throne room or somewhere that I'm sure was extremely intimidating. To have all that pressure on them to just, all you got to do is bow. That's all you got to do. And get it over with. You can go say you're sorry later. You can do whatever. But at that very moment of courage, I mean, there are stories in the Bible where I just wish I could be, not maybe in them, but at least, a fly on the wall looking at this. And this is one of those stories. They're probably stuttering, and then suddenly, just this moment of courage. Just this moment of conviction where Shadrach looks right at that king. And he says, I know you're tough. I know you're big. I know you can throw me in a fiery furnace. But even if you do, I'm not backing down. There are a lot of people in this world who equate success with God's blessing. The idea is this, and I want to clarify it because that can mean a lot of different things, but a lot of people in this world think this, that if you're in God's will, then you will have success and things will go well for you all of the time. But if the life of Jesus tells us anything, it is that sometimes being in the will of God means suffering. Sometimes being in the will of God means worldly failure. The very moment of dying on the cross was both an example of utter worldly failure and being directly in the will of God. I'm going to end this sermon with a story about my friend Emeta. Emeta is a deaconess in the church in Aigali. There might have been a picture of her. I'd have to go through and look, but up there. She used to live about a 2 hours walk from our house in a place called Aigali. Allison and our kids, we live in a village called Aigali, among the Gumu's people there. And we've planted a church there in Aigali, and about 2 hours from Aigali, there used to be a village called Bunt. And a number of years ago, my evangelist and I had been doing something called chronological Bible storying in 11 different places. It's a fancy term for going through the Bible chronologically, telling Bible stories, essentially, to help people understand the Bible from a story perspective. We were in 11 different places at that time, and one of the places was this village called Bunt. Before we started telling the Bible stories, though, Emeta had been very sick for quite a while. She had a very swollen abdomen. It's a pretty common condition. And she'd been to a witch doctor. She spent a lot of time, energy, effort trying to get rid of this swollen abdomen problem. And she was sick all the time. She was weak all the time. But she had no success. Well, then we came to start telling Bible stories in this village. And at first, she came for the entertainment value. To be honest, there's no TVs, there's no movie theaters, no stores, no electricity, no phone service, no nothing out there in the middle in Bunt. And so a lot of people would come to these Bible storytelling times. What we do is we come, it depends on the place, but like every Tuesday afternoon, we'd be there and tell a story from the Bible. Well, a lot of people would come to these Bible story times just because it was entertaining. I mean, first of all, there's a tall white dude to look at. Number two, these stories were just interesting to listen to. But as she began to listen, she gradually began to wonder if these stories might have more than just entertainment value in her life. You know, she heard these stories about Jesus healing sick people, and she had this problem. She was sick. So one day, Aboma, one of my evangelists, was there in Bunt. I wasn't there on this day, but he was there and he told me about it. He went to tell one of the Bible stories, and Emeta asked him, it was a story about Jesus, and Emeta asked him, he said, does Jesus still heal people today? It was a good question. And Aboma said, yes, God can still heal people today. And Emeta continued, well, how does he do it? Show me how to, show me how it happens. And so Aboma used it as a way of talking about prayer and how if God wanted to heal someone, he could heal someone. Well, Emeta asked Aboma to pray for her. Now, this wasn't an instant kind of healing, but over the next 5 days, her abdomen became less swollen until 5 days later, she was perfectly fine. She had been healed. Well, the next week, Aboma shows back up to Bunt. But this time, the people of Bunt have a story to tell about how Jesus had healed one of them. Just a miraculous event. It transformed that community. That community went from sort of spectators of the gospel to participants in the gospel. It was really exciting. And Emeta became one of the strong leaders in our church there in Bunt. Eventually, the church grew to about 50 people. And it was a really good, strong, thriving church. A few years after that, though, a few years ago, the people of Bunt were forcibly moved to Aigali, to our village. And the government does this on occasion for lots of different reasons. This one was because they wanted to move people closer to different kinds of services. Medical services, our clinic, the educational services, there's a government school there. So sometimes the government would just move people around in Ethiopia. And the whole village of Bunt was moved to our village. And Emeta, along with the village, the rest of the village was given just little plots of land, actually right next to our airstrip there. And at the time when Emeta moved with her family to Aigali, she was married. At the time she had several almost grown kids. Her kids were high school and even maybe 20 on down. There were 4 of them. And she came, and her husband was not heavily involved in the church, but marginally involved in the church. But he was actually very supportive of her being involved in the church. Well, Emeta's husband suddenly became very sick. And he went to the clinic and he saw Allison and our other nurse, Lemma. And they determined that he had liver failure from over-drinking for many different years. Well, his condition just kept getting worse and worse. And there's really nothing we could do for him out there. And he began to ask more and more questions, and eventually he began to come to church very regularly as he could, if he could walk to the church. Well, eventually, despite all of the clinic's best efforts and the church's prayers, Emeta's husband died. During this whole process of his illness, though, Emeta could have given up, could have said, well, God, you're not taking care of me. You're not taking care of my husband. But she remained loyal to the church, and she remained faithful to God. Even though God didn't heal her husband, she was grateful to the church for their prayers and their support. She was grateful to the clinic for the things that we tried to do to help her and him. Emeta's attitude, and this is more of a translation, so it's kind of a rough translation, but Emeta's attitude was this. She said, sometimes God chooses to heal, and sometimes he doesn't. God chooses for himself, but I have to choose for myself, and I choose to follow God. Emeta and Meshach had and have something in common. They both exhibit that but even if attitude. I like that, but even if attitude. Even if things are going to go wrong, I'm still going to stick with God. She's seen God work in her life. She was healed physically by God. She knows that God can and will get involved in people's lives. But even if God chooses not to heal her husband, but even if God chooses not to save Meshach from the fiery furnace, but even if God chooses not to heal me from malaria when I get it, but even if God chooses not to eliminate my financial problems, but even if it all ends in worldly failure, I want you to know, O King, that we will not bow to your golden idol. We will not give up on our faith in the Creator God. We will not turn to witch doctors and magic. We will not wilt into a puddle of skepticism, doubt, or materialism. And we will not abandon the one true God who gave us life in the first place. Let me pray. Father, you're a powerful God. Sometimes it feels like you're hiding in the corner and we're up against big, bad kings. People who can throw us in blazing furnaces. We're up against diseases like cancer, malaria, liver failure. And we think, why don't you just intervene? And I don't know the answer, God, but I do know this. I do know that we stand in the great tradition of people like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who when their time came to face the evils of the world, they didn't flinch, they didn't turn, they didn't wilt, and they didn't cower. That's the people we are from. Those are our spiritual forefathers. Those are the people we think about when our challenges come, when the King Nebuchadnezzars in our life challenge us. I pray, Father, for you to give us the courage to be people of faith. I can just imagine how proud of them you were. And I pray that, God, you give us opportunities, situations in our life when we can respond in ways that make you that proud as well. In Jesus' name, amen. Hello from Ethiopia. My name is Craig Fowler. Allison, our 3 children, and I live and work among the Gumuz people here in the Horn of Africa. Our house is in a remote village called Igali, which is in western Ethiopia. We moved to Ethiopia 9 years ago to plant churches and to build a health clinic. At that time, the people of our area had no access to the gospel, nor did they have any medical care available. Working with our national partner churches from south of the Blue Nile, we are happy to report that we have planted 15 new church plants north of the Blue Nile. It is exciting to see the way God has grown the church here in our area over the last several years. As the kingdom of God expands, more and more local leaders are emerging to lead a thriving, healthy church. When we first moved to Igali, Allison started treating patients under a tree outside our house. Soon, though, we built a small metal building to run the clinic out of. That worked fine until our patient load began to exceed our building's capabilities. Last year, we undertook the project of greatly expanding our health facilities by building a brand new 4-room hollow concrete block building. At that time, you all joined us in this effort by giving generously to this project. By giving to expand our health facility here in Igali, you took an active role in showing the people of this area that God truly loves them. Thank you for giving so generously. We want to give you an update on the status and effectiveness of our new facilities as a way of saying thank you. Our new clinic is up and running as of September. When we opened this new facility, our patient load immediately jumped. Recently, we saw 66 patients in one single day. Now, this is more than our daily average of around 35 patients, but it still illustrates the way that we are using the new facility to reach more people for Christ. At the time we built the new clinic building, we also built a separate bathroom facility and in addition, another 2-room building as a pharmacy for dispensing medicines. Another important part of our expansion came in the form of a clean water well right on the clinic grounds. Previously, the people of our area got their drinking water from a nearby river. This only added to the healthcare burden of our area because many diseases are waterborne. New churches are being planted. The gospel is being preached in previously unreached areas. More people are experiencing the love of God in a tangible way through our medical ministry. And the local population are finally able to drink clean, healthy water because you cared enough to give. Thank you for partnering with us in accomplishing this great task of reaching the Gumu's people for Christ.